So what I want to know is, what I would like to do is essentially discuss with you how this should look like. Actually, so that I can push that. So the first view that we are going to build, I think it's reasonable to start in a messaging app by landing on a view that contains a list of messages. Okay, so at least I think one possible thing to do is to put somewhere here a list view. I don't think it will be the only thing here. But so here there is a list view for public messages. Okay, I don't know what other elements need to go here. And I don't know how this needs to be connected to other pages and what the flow is. So then there are at least two introductory hooks. One is this, and you know, please, so I'm going to do a bit of the beginning, but then I rely on you to actually suggest what comes later. So one of these hooks is this. So if you wake up this app and you have no internet connection, or no GPS, you need to go to some place in which you explain to somebody why the thing is actually not working. Okay? So if we really build it, where you know there is a way to test, you get, for example, for the network, you can get the network manager, and then you can ask the network manager whether there is an internet connection present. If you post on Piazza the question, etc., I can post some snippets of code that does it, because I think I've did it already many times, and so you know I must have it ready somewhere. That's all. There should be some check in which we ask if there is internet app, and also if there is a GPS app. Because if these two are not app, so and here we need to go to a diagnostic screen. Okay, I don't know how to do it, or you can decide how to do it. But basically, here you will have a message. So this is a bit of the degrees of freedom we have. Actually, if you look at, I told you that intents can go directly into an activity, into essentially a page, figuratively, of the system even, right? So what you can do is here is this. Let me give you an example. Obviously it's a bit small. You can move forward against it because you know I cannot always write super large on the board. But let me try to do it a little bit larger. An example is that you have no internet, and the message should be different. Okay, one spends a lot of time. If you do apps for real, thinking about these silly things like, you know, exactly what the wording of these messages should be. It's incredible the amount of time you spend on such tiny things. But so if you do these, then you have to decide what are the possible actions are. You know, here there will be the back button. So if you want to go back, you can always go back. I don't know if it's only these are I think it's like this. But if you look at the phone, there is the settings activity, and you know, which is inside your phone settings. And the settings activity, if you search a little bit, has a lot of destinations for intents. So that if you want to throw people directly to the screen of the network settings, then you can. Okay. And so a good idea would be here probably to say configure. Okay. And if you say configure, this goes back, this goes to essentially settings. So you are throwing actually the user outside of your application. Okay, and I think for network, for GPS, you can do something similar. Like, you know, would you like to turn the GPS on, or you know, your GPS, you don't seem to have location enabled. Please configure your phone. Your configure and back. I don't know if we want to put a back that says. Back, but it's not clear to me exactly what happens if you go back. Because you know, if you go back and still you have no GPS or no connection, what do we do? It's like, yeah, sorry, I hope you will enjoy our app next time. No, I mean, I don't know what to tell them essentially. So it's a little bit of a problem. Okay, so we need to do a bit of this couple of diagnostics. Another thing we want to do, and I don't know if you want to do it, but this would be a sort of is one of these things that takes a lot of time to do well. would be that when you start using these, okay, we can say whether this is your first use. Okay, and if it is the first use, we could go, this is typically designed later, because if your application is not set yet, it would take too much time to do it. But essentially, there is a sort of introduction that you can give them. You know, many apps have now this initial tour in which you give them one or two screens in which you explain to them how to do the app, how to use the app. No? For example, you would tell them, look, the first page you see will be the list of your public messages. If you click on one of them, whatever happens, and then you show them a map with a, a circle on it, and, the radius of, I don't know, 100 meters or 500 meters, whatever it is, and you tell them, this is a radius in which you can chat with other people. This is generally called the tour. And I don't recommend that you do it, because doing it well requires a lot of time in graphics design, basically. I mean, we can do it, right? But it's also easier to do it later, because it's easier to do it when you have exactly, it's really time-consuming to change the features of the first app, of the main app, while you change the features of the tool as well. Because you have to keep them in sync. So I would recommend doing that. So this is the sort of the first screen. Now, what should go here? And how should people communicate? I told you to think a little bit about it. Are there any ideas that you would like any series or anything you want to speak? But is there any idea on how you want to do it? Threaded, by private, one-to-one conversations, how? Yes?
So I think for a private use, like a button that would basically trigger an intent to all private conversations would probably be useful, since it's a bit awkward to both have to make public messages and then each click on that public message to kind of initiate a private message.
So say it again, you want to have a button to see all the private conversations?
Yeah, so the whole flow would be, say I want to send a private message to someone, I click the button in the public field next to their message, I send their message, then whoever was the receiver of that message could click this private button, and then view kind of an intermediate page where it would show all private message, private threads basically, before actually entering that conversation.
So you would like to have, let me see if I interpret your wish in a plausible way. You would like to have a screen with public threads. You would like to have another screen with private threads. And then if you choose a private thread, then you go to the private thread itself.
Exactly.
Okay, that's possible, but essentially you are also saying implicitly, I don't know if you're saying this, but just to ask you, does the public conversation happen in a single stream of consciousness, or if I post a message, then there is a possibility of having public replies, but that you don't see, you just see the topic essentially. So should we have a threaded public conversation or just a stream of consciousness? This is one point. So let me ask you.
I was thinking maybe more like APIs, so that means for the security issues, private message, and then just have it for
A little bit more like
the API app.
the API app, which I don't use it.
And it's like a private public message, and then everybody publicly reply. And I can think of all the issues that security.
I mean, the security issues from the private messages are not very worrisome. I mean, if it's the technical issue that worries, if it's a software one, it's a different stuff. But just hashing the names of the users, I don't know, maybe it doesn't happen.
Aside from the security, though, when you have anonymous people able to directly message each other, you're gonna have to deal with harassment and just creepiness and that kind of stuff. Whereas public messaging, it's more of a community moderated.
Right. Now this may be a strong point. Because, for example, if you post a message, I can, send you a very nasty one. And yes, you can reply, but you know that it's pointless, right? To reply to this kind of thing. And then what you do, and you're just annoyed. Right.
You could have it where when someone tries to message you, you choose if you want to accept it or not.
Yeah, but if somebody is harassing you, once you really get the sign, the thing is done, essentially. No, I think. I mean, it's like a threat.
Can I just block users based on this?
Yes, we could do it. So for example, suppose I harass you, then you block me. And then the block is so strong that I'm blocked to everybody. And then what do? I create a new user ID though. No, I mean, we can do this better, you know, but I'm just a little bit worried going down a path of an arms race, because what you can do is this, you know, at some point, when I created the account, I showed you the code, right, in this Clicker app. I think you have it in fossilized in this first version that I had. But essentially, if I do the code, you can get my user account and email name. And creating a new email, Google email account and installing it on the phone, it takes time. So what you can do is that you essentially can get all the set of accounts that I have on my phone and block them all. No? And in that way, you sort of erase the cost of harassment, because if I harass him, then boom, he blocks all my main accounts. But on the other hand, you know, then the harassment is that he blocks me. You know, just because I tell him, I don't know, you know, some comment that is, you know, he doesn't like so much, maybe. Even on a side discussion, you know, we may be having a political discussion and I make a comment he doesn't like. No, and then he blocks me, and then I can not use the app anymore. Right? We have invented a negative spread application, I guess. Right. So okay, so if we do it threaded, we could do it threaded and public then. Would everybody be happy with these? Yes.
Could we have it where if somebody posts something, then we can post like comment on it, but it's still public, so people will still be seeing it, but it's like you're messaging them, but everybody can see it.
Yes, this is like threaded public and threaded, right? So this will be the choice, yes?
I guess I would also support the public Reddit sort of thing, because right now we kind of stuck in between like Reddit and the other forum type thing and text messaging, because when you click on something, when you click on message by somebody, they have multiple messages in the public view that you can see, all of which will have button that you click on, but when you click on that button, you won't be going to something related. You will be going to your own private chat.
Yeah.
Regardless of which post you click on.
Yes.
The same thing.
Yes, which is a bit weird, right?
Which is a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's weird, especially because you don't know in principle that these two messages are from the same person, and you discover it only when you land on them and you discover that the private conversation is the same. Yeah, you know, I didn't think well about homework 3 from the social point of view. I just wanted to give you an example of some code to write. Here, you're absolutely right. So if you do public and private, is there any comment? I mean, the only negative thing is that EPR is doing the same thing. Now we are not doing this to succeed as a company, right? But I'm just wondering, you know, it would be. Is there any other mode of communication that that would be nice to explore? Otherwise, anybody has any? I think that the one thing that is a bit of a pity is that there doesn't seem to be any way to encompass your chat, except for the self-selected group. But on the other hand, if we don't have a stable identity, it's difficult to do chat. So maybe it is sort of unavoidable.
If we want to try something different, we could just go all the way in the other direction. Anonymous text messaging app, essentially, because that way you can have a private thread, but you can also see everybody who you can see who is online. I guess and that's the way chat rooms work. And you have a public space where everybody is posting.
Yeah,
and then you have a list of people that are online, and you can click on each of those people and you just start talking to them. So that way you're still having private conversations, but you're also not tied to a single. You're not tied to messages when you're actually talking to people instead of threads.
Yeah. So this, this is sort of the second alternative that is going on in the back of my mind, and I don't know how good an idea it is. But, so it often happens to me that I go to some places and I start a conversation with somebody, say, something like that. And okay, fine, you can exchange a business card, but often you would like to be in touch with them, but you don't have the time because it's so awkward. Essentially, you pull out your phone and start to say, "Oh, okay, let me add you to my contact list," which always takes a long time or something like that, right? And so imagine that when we are in the same place, I can actually well, we don't want to play too much with NFC. It's possible and it would be very cute, but then it works only with phones with NFC. But if for example, I and him go together and then I click a button, and he clicks a button, and this essentially says, I make up the nickname Peter, which is my first name, so he has his nickname, whatever. And then essentially say, so, here you got in touch with Peter, now you can message him. And if you haven't been in the same place, close to each other, but together you cannot talk to other people. So, for example, I cannot message you just because, I heard from him that you are somebody who exists. If we can make face-to-face and the other person back on together, at least once, we can chat. And so, in a way, this is entirely feasible server-side, right? Because we can just check for button events that are close in time and close in space. And we can, and so we can see the nicknames, so he may not really know my real name. But at the same time, we don't totally prevent harassment, but you have to have agreed to talk to me. I mean, you cannot prevent being harassed by a friend in general, I guess. No. Okay. So what do you think? This could also be, and then this would be a very different kind of app. It would be a one-to-one messaging app, but it would essentially give you a list of people. For every person, I think you need to remember where you met that person, and which are at least me. And for a lot of these people that you meet in these random occasions, it would be very powerful reminder, like, okay, you met this person in San Francisco while you were at that dinner or you're at that hotel, oh, that's who he is. And in fact, I would do the vice versa, who's that person that I met yesterday, and what's the name again that I cannot possibly remember it. But you would be able to search it on a map. I mean, this we could add later, But then this would be essentially a one-to-one messaging app in which you see that would be the notifications and getting updates and being able to send messages and filling the list of your last messages in some format. But the fact is that you will be able to add contacts by clicking on a button together when you are in Cosmos. And so when you click on this button, you send to the server a message. And the server essentially, well, there is a bit of timing that is difficult, so I think it is not so easy to do the thing well, of course, because first you set the button and you say to the server basically anything, and then called Luca, and this is the timestamp. And then after a while, you need to periodically check with the server, did anybody click with me? No? And then at that point, there will be, I don't know what the name is, say it's George. But no, George clicked here at the same time, Do you accept me among your comments? No, I mean, you just accept. Because otherwise, if you have to do any of these confirmations, so the phone is in your pocket at the time.
What if you're with someone close to this, and that someone's also sitting next to you and also?
Yeah, so maybe there is a confirmation because sorry, I think have you really Peter now? And Peter, yeah, Peter, okay, fine. And it could give you the list of the people who have clicked the invite. Because if you are like at a break who talks at a conference, there's a lot of people that would be using the account and there's a tiny people that chatting. I have a lot of social life, so they might examples. What do you think? Should we do which model is more appealing to you?
Public.
Eh?
The public.
public messaging localized with a hidden identity, with a with ephemeral identity. Ephemeral identity, so the identity that doesn't last. So a EA clone. Anybody has ideas?
I really like your idea, because I feel like we already have it, so why do that again? Why try to replicate that? There's so many other ways we can use that. I like your idea because I haven't heard of it. I like to try it myself. Try to do something like that.
Yeah, yeah. There was, I think at some point I knew of somebody who wanted to do a dating app on that. But this is, you know, like, oh, I remember that, you know, a woman on the bus, and I was also on the bus, and we looked at each other, and I thought we clicked at the same time. But then, you know, the guy was a theoretician and not an implementer. So, you know, I think somebody, in fact, tried to do such an app, right? Sorry? Eh?
That's already how people use the Yak and use Reddit, so.
I see. No, but at any rate, you know, and then he didn't do anything with it. You know, he was slow on his feet in doing it, and never went anywhere. But this one, you know, it would be just, you know, not so much for dating, but like a more convenient way to get in touch with somebody. I mean, of course, you can use it also for, you know, getting in touch with somebody you like, but you know, it's more general. So other comments. I mean, we could use a clicker, so but we can just have a show of hands or local versus like, no, how to call it, one-to-one. Like let's call it meet face-to-face. One of them. Okay. So the one I proposed, let's call it the face-to-face, because you have to meet face-to-face at least once at the beginning time. Okay? And the other one, let's call it the EPI clone, just to give them nicknames so we know what we're talking about. How many vote for the face-to-face? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. EPI clone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Every working now. Okay, but maybe we can give you a little bit more time, because anyway, you know, at some point I want to start the second part of the class on services. So we used half an hour for this. And think at it. I think, you know, Tuesday we talk about it again. And if you think at it, you know, do the exercise, because one of the two will win, of drawing on some sheets of paper how this should look like. For example, you know, if this is the private one, if there is a face-to-face, you know, what should we actually put on here? You know, there should be some pattern that says class, and some pattern that has a friends list, or no, the friends, no, I mean, this is complicated. I mean, it's not so easy to do the details. So let me just shoot some things in the air, and you know, you can decide, what do we need? Yeah, I mean, you want to have a list of messages that has been sent to you, roughly like Gmail, right? But then you have to have also some, I mean, Gmail, like SMS, I think is a better comparison. But then you also need some way in which you can search for friends somehow, based on where you met them. You know, I mean, it's a complicated app to do well. I mean, I don't think it would be. I think if some people were motivated enough, any one of these things can become a company. Now, whether it's a company that would be successful, I don't know, you know, because even things like EPIAC, you know, I don't know. And you know that Secret gave the money back to the investors recently, right? I don't know if you have read it. There was this app Secret, and I have never used it actually, but you could communicate in secret. It took off very rapidly, raised 50 million, no, something like that. But then, you know, they became known for bullying and for you know, unpleasant message exchanges. It lost traction, and then I think the founders gave back $35 million to the VCs, and basically shut down. So there is always a very, very interesting question, you know, of how you build the value of a company. So if you do a company like this, and even is successful, either you do something like WhatsApp that really has how many users, 500 million or something like that. And at that point, you know, once you become so large, you become valuable, or else, you know, what's the business plan? Would people pay users something like this or not? You know, would people be so excited that you have so many millions of users that would buy you for a lot of money? but it's a bit funny, you know. It sounds like a sort of bubble economy in some way, that you just get a lot of users, you have no idea of how to monetize them, but you still are bought for $1 billion because you have a lot of users, just because you bring users. You know, it's as if, you know, it's not really one of these scams in which, you know, I give $1 to the person who sent me a message, I send 10 messages and they'll give $1 to me. But it's not entirely very different from that, right? Because you know, we all give users to you, you pay us billions, so we give users to you, and people believe that you know, you're worth more, but in the end, you know, it's to be seen how well you monetize. I mean, Facebook is monetizing well, so I don't think that buying WhatsApp was a good idea, but there is some issue there. A lot of these social apps grow very fast, and you know, I'm not optimistic that a lot of them will make it. Yeah, I think Snapchat will be the next to see how it does. Long discussion. So think of you know, what should we put in these various pages for your favorite of the two applications you want to build. Okay? And we have a vote again, yeah.
I just don't see the difference between this one-to-one for the one-to-one app. Like, why are we trying to replace SMS?
Because in an SMS, I think the things that is, so one thing in general that I notice is that sometimes the difference between something great and something stupid is extremely small. No, it's not a joke. I notice the timing and the gaming products. You know, sometimes the difference between, you know why Google and Gareth never gave us a data that they needed? Because for the longest time, they pushed everybody to sign up in Google Plus, and you couldn't possibly start Hangout without everybody being signed in. You couldn't possibly send anybody else a link without Hangout. And so I cannot count on the meetings that I've been in and that the standard that you make, because everybody is trying to find which account they actually have to log in and direction from. So, you know, I mean, in the meantime, there are other companies like GoToEasy that are, you know, have a fantastic business and actually make a lot of money. Because they have this feature that, you know, when you create a new thing, you get the link, you click on the link or whatever platform you have, you actually go to the, you have this tab and you're introduced to the ads. So, this is just to say, so, you know, coming to your question, what's the big difference? Suppose fine, let's do SMS. So how does that work exactly? So I have to actually take my phone and type in the contact. And it takes a lot of time. And you know, I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I have to arrive to visa, I never because I basically I don't hear receive. Because until we can chat by voice, we don't care about SMS chat obviously. And when we are leaving, we are typically in a hurry, right? Because at the same time we invite to you better, so also saying bye to you, bye to you, and etc. And it's like super awkward, right?
So why not make it so that when, like, why include the messaging into the app? Why not just have it as a quick way to share contact information? So it's like, we do this and it gets sent to our contacts. And
That's an interesting idea. That's an interesting idea. I think that maybe some apps already do share contacts on the background at the same time.
so too.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
And so when this comes down to things, you know, you can do casually. So I can work things, but I'm not saying, you know, I'm just talking the things there. Basically. So one thing is this, not because I give you the idea what you put in my contact, which may include the resident information that I may not necessarily want to do that. Okay, so you know, if I give you a etc., maybe it's okay that we message each other, but you know, I don't really want you to, you know, have my, list of Google accounts that will be on my contact or something like that. The other thing is, so this is reason number one. Reason number two, research, because I want to remember, you know, who's the person that I met, and here this would be the super useful thing. Now, suppose I go mountain biking with somebody and I know that I went a month ago. And you know, this was a friend of my friend, and now I don't remember his name. Now what do I do if I have a contact after? Nothing. Instead, in this way, I can go there and search, you know, who is it that I need to get a sample? Oh, yeah, that's. Was there another observation?
Oh, I was just gonna say that the contact where it could like takes the other person's contact and just puts in from there's an app called Phone.
Right, you back the phones together.
Yeah, and then
And they use the accelerometer. Actually, using the accelerometer could be a fun way clicking the button at the same time. But I don't know if it's needed. I don't know. I don't know. We can click it. It's basically the same because see that this user and see using the servers. So
I like the idea that you can search or you can figure out who it was, where you were, or something like that, and figure out. Because I feel like that happens to me too. I'll meet someone and then I'll just forget their name or something like that. And it's like, and then you can't remember where it's
yeah.
kind of useful to know where you were because you'll remember where you were when you met them. You'll be like, oh, I was in a coffee shop or something.
Yeah. So another way is the contact tag that remembers where we were when we went to the contact. I guess. But the fact is that it needs to be fast. If I go mountain biking and you're the friend of my friend, I'm not gonna, at the end of the ride, sit there and try to slowly between you. So fast we're gonna do it. Otherwise, not. A lot of these things. Then I can message you whether we want to go this weekend. And it's kind of easy. So.
But it's still not as good, it's not
Yeah, but it's a lot faster than my John Smith, and then class 1, 8, 4 or 8, then what? I don't know, it's like,
I think it'd be cool if, like, in the, whatever we use as our get message request, if we had one of the members be the radius basically around you. So like if Yak fixes the radius, you
Okay.
don't know what it is, and it shows you a map as though it's like these are all the messages you can see. The map shows you a way smaller area that you can actually select messages from. So I feel like it's pretty easy to just have in the server code, like have it as a variable when we pass it.
Okay, great. So, let me maybe now move to the other topic. So, but think for next time, which one of the two you want to do? API cloud versus, face-to-face. Let's call it just to have an easy next.
Maybe, with like me, person, it just sounds very different. And for that, instead of alternate, why don't, if you meet someone that you use that to picture them and try to find a profile? I mean,
so try to find the profile well, like just look
Yeah.
I think the contact in an easy way when I keep the background of the way. Because so if you need multiple people at the same location, then I will be able to know who's who, I guess. But there's still something about that.
I mean, like if you meet them, you don't know their name, they're like, hey, I'm so and so out. You make picture of them, they do the profile, and then try to match.
So essentially, we would be able to just say, okay, I can also use about, let's call it face-to-face. I also use a face-to-face with ES. And at that point, I should be able to browse, before I leave the place, all the users that are at this location, I will be able to spot your face and to add you.
Yeah, but if you can picture them, the app should find it better. It's something different.
I see, so you use this, I take a picture of you and you have to face comparisons.
Yeah, so there might be like it might pop up in the profiles, but that way,
Yeah, I mean, we look at it a little bit better. I mean, I like the idea, but also it's not complicated because, I don't want to have to implement the space of the classes and face identification and face matching. There are algorithms that work the whole time. I mean, unless there's a library out there that they can spare me the work. But yes, I mean, and also there's a privacy issue because as long as you then she's like to be a user of this, but she's a user of the app. And I can maybe take a photo of you when I pretend to keep this contact. Like, what is your contact? And then I will you and then I start messaging you. I mean, you're asking me for a message. No, I don't know. I think that, but there are fun.
Do they have any built in the phone that recognizes your face?
Yes.
Like you can log in?
Yeah.
Is there a way to use that?
Hey, no, because the language is widely situated. I cannot point necessarily.
Actually, this was, what I was always annoyed about Google Glass. Everybody's mind works in its own way, okay? And mine works well for certain things and it really poorly for others. And the thing for which it works poorly in general is remembering names. And so the one killer app that I wanted from you of Google Glass was face recognition, right? So they would tell me, hey, that person is called George, and they would say, hello, hi, George. Being able to find her, they'd be socially accomplished, when I meet them in the corridors. But they prevented me that, and so I always thought it was a bummer. Okay. A lot of fun, but think it over. We do it also on Tuesday. Now we begin sort of the serious part. Services. Let me share the screen. So I have some presentation and some code to give you. And oh no, I forgot to wake up the screen, I guess. Sorry. There is always one more step. 2.7. Okay, let's see whether this works. I can see me there. Okay. Okay, simply waking up slowly. No, it really does not want to hide. I think it's because of these. Okay, so what's the idea behind services? Sometimes we need to do things that last longer than each individual screen. So in general, we have not a lot of control on activities, right? Because an activity is created when the screen is in front of the user, and at any time the user may switch to something else. So if you want some communication or some stuff to go on for some time, we need to use a service. For instance, I'm pretty sure that Gmail uses a background service that every now and then wakes up and checks if you have new email and synchronizes it. Well, maybe they use push notifications for that. But for example, if you use a GPS app that logs your location and that has a service running in the background that will log your location every now and then build the map for you of where you have been. For when you take a photo on your phone and you have automatic uploads, what happens is that the photo is taken immediately, and then there is a background service that is in charge of synchronizing your local photos with the photos on the cloud, and that will say, no, I have one more photo, let me start a background upload, and the photo is uploaded in the background, etc., etc. So these are examples of uses for services, okay? And we want to know, how do we create a service and how do we communicate with it? I mean, another example of a service is you want to build a music player, right? And if you build a music player, you want to have some UI in which you can choose what you are playing. But then you want the music to be played by a service so that even if you switch screen, the music continues playing, right? So it has to be a service, essentially. The thing that keeps up your phone call when you're calling is also a service, because if you notice, you can be in the middle of a phone call and then switch to some other screen, but it continues to be that phone call. So essentially, the phone call is handled by a service with the notifications. So how do we build services, and how do we communicate with them? So you declare a service in the manifest, but actually the easy way to start a service, now since we are all on Android Studio, and Android Studio actually works in a uniform way do these things better than Eclipse, I have to say, is that to create a service, the silly answer is that you choose new, create, and you select create to create a service, because this does for you a little bit of bookkeeping. Essentially, it creates a service class. A service is just like very parallel to an activity. An activity is a class that subclasses the activity class, right? And in the same way, the service is a class that subclasses the service class. And you have to have the class, and you have to have the entry in the manifest. So the entry in the manifest says something like this. It says whether it's enabled, whether it's exported. Exported means whether the service is available also outside of your application. Okay? You know that we can have these intents that are, no, it's not really for intents, but we will see later. But essentially, you can bind it to a service. So, for example, there is a music player service, and if I bind it to it, I'm able to talk to it. And so you're essentially saying, can anybody talk to it, or can only can the service only talk to these that are within my app? Okay, for example, there is I think I will check there is an uploader service. Anybody can talk to it because you can say, anybody can add things to that particular. Okay, but there are other services that are more private. Okay, so then there is a label, permissions. And then there is the all important Android process. So essentially, and this is a bit of a fine point, but maybe let's do it at the beginning. So the service does not necessarily have its own execution space. So if you don't do it yourself, the service does not have its own independent thread. Of course, you normally do want to have an independent thread for a process. That's the whole point. Because if it does not have a permanent thread, it has no way of doing any computation that is not directly initiated by the activity and terminates when the activity loses interest. Okay? But even if you give the process its own thread, as we will see how to do in this class, two threads can share variable space, so you can communicate essentially by shared variables. I will go in more. So two threads work well, but they have one drawback. That if one of the two things dies, the other one dies as well. So when you take one of these faults like null pointer, non-pointer exception, etc., what is killed is not the thread; it's the whole process. So if you have a background process, if you have a background service, and if you have the main app that we have to take this choice. Do I want the service to be in its own process, yes or no? And the difference is that if it is in its own process, it will be a little bit harder to talk to it, because you will not be able to share variables that easily. You need to use message passing in a certain way to talk to it. But the advantage of having it in a separate process is that it dies independently from you. And this is often useful. For example, if you have you may have some long-running computation or synchronization or other thing that you want to go on, even if your UI dies. Okay. This is important. I mean, as soon as you do something like Gmail rarely crashes, of course. So they do it well, and they have a lot of users, so there are a lot of ways to find the bugs, I guess. But suppose that Gmail crashes the UI. You sort of think, hey, this is silly. But you would be even more annoyed if the background sync crashed, right? That would be a problem. So I will teach you later some techniques to make sure that your background services don't actually die, and if they die, they come back to life. But this is what this Android process means. For the moment in this class, we will not be developing services in their own process, because it's one additional layer of complication. But it's not much in addition to what we will be doing, and so we'll give you the methods for doing that as well. Okay, so. Now, there are two ways of starting a service, and this generates a lot of confusion in the implementation. But a service bears the birthmark of how it was started for its whole life. Okay, and it works in this way. you can start them by either starting them explicitly or by binding to them. Binding to a service is like telling to the service, hey, I need you for a moment. And multiple people can bind to the service. Okay, so multiple people, multiple apps, right? So for example, what can happen is this. This is my service. Okay, this activity goes and says, hey, let me bind to you. For example, this may be the music player, and the activity says, hey, let me bind to you so that I can get a list of songs that I can display. I can tell you what's playing, how many seconds into the song, and then there may be, maybe this activity is called I don't know, my player, and then there's another activity that is called discover new artists that also wants to bind to the service that manages music. Okay, so these other activity to which you switch can also bind to these. And then after a while, you close the music player, but you continue to play with these other activities. So even if you unbind it, the service is still running. And if you start a service by binding to it, once the last binding goes down, the service itself is shut off. So essentially, if you create a service by binding to it, once the last user unbinds, the service is shut off. You don't have to do anything particular to shut it off. Okay? So these kind of services are there essentially only to answer questions. For example, again, I haven't used it in detail, but I think that there must be some kind of service that, okay, maybe not a good example. I was thinking for the context. But at any rate, there are some services like these, that essentially give you access to something. It's a very good way to package code. Many of the Google Play services are done in that way. Okay, for example, the location services is done in this way. When you bind it to the location service, it starts to talk to you, and you register to it, it gives you location data, and the GPS is up. And as long as there is somebody in the GPS is up. When everybody finishes using the GPS, the location service is shut off, the GPS is freed, and the thing stops. Roughly, okay? That's roughly the idea of the services created by binding. They are alive only as long as there is a user. The other way to create a service is that you explicitly start it. If you start it with the command the start service to which you pass an intent as usual, the intent service creates these activities and services. So if you use a start service, there is a command start activity to which you pass the intent, but you can also do start service to passing it an intent, that will start the service explicitly. If you start it explicitly, the service will go on until it will self-destroy. And you can design itself, or because you can talk to the service, and create a service because you will be able to exchange information with the service. So you can tell the service, I'm done with it, thank you. And in that case, boom, the service self-destroys. But if you don't tell it that, the service will go on forever. Especially if it's in its own process. Until it either crashes, or you kill it, the session is the way to stop the services. If you go in your services, so if you go in your phone and the settings and their applications, you can say all apps, there is a time in which you can say, for example, you can see the listing. You can see, Gmail has one activity and one service running, and you can actually manually stop and keep them if you want. Okay, but these are the two very different ways of starting to run. And the way it originally was started to run is what matters. So if I create you as a started service, even if I then bind it to you, when I am bind, you continue running because you have the birthmark of being created by start. So you're not dependent on the bindings for dying. Okay? And so to create a service, the general things are these. You create a service by subclassing service, and then you have 4 general commands. On start command, this means that somebody has sent you an intent to be started. And if you need to do anything, when you start, that's where you do it. I will give you examples of how to fill in this code, obviously, okay? But there is on start command, on bind, which is when somebody wants to bind with you, on create, that is the initialization. So when you are when somebody wants to start you first run on create and then on start command. Then this means first, hey, come to life, yes, and then this is a start command, and then I can look at it and do stuff with it if I want. Okay, And then there is on destroy, which is created when you stop executing. If you are bound when the last one unbinds, and if you have started, you can say finish. That will, you know, harakiri you. It will destroy you, and then on destroy would be called. Okay. Yeah. So this is basically says the same thing. So there is one fact. There is one particularly simple type of service for which they have decided to give you a shortcut. It's called an intent service. So sometimes all you want to do in a service is doing something that takes long time. You don't particularly care when it's finished, but you just want it to be done in the background. A file upload would be a typical example. A file upload is if you don't want to give a retry option. It's a typical example, okay? So in this case, they invented a very special case that is called an intent service. This is like this. Intent is like, I don't know, it's like having a sort of battler, or, you know, somebody that executes your orders. So I have this battler sitting somewhere, and they say, I need it to be done, this should be done. So I create an intent that says what is to be done. For example, upload. The intent contains a URI that is the file that I need to be uploaded. I give this intent, and then I add this URI as an extra of the file that I need to upload. And then I say, I pass this intent to an intent service. The intent service will have a queue of intents. It will do them one by one, and no parallelism. But what the intent service does is this. It says, more work to do. Give me this intent, I do it. When I'm finished, I see. If the intent queue is empty, I stop it. And if the intent queue contains an intent, I go on with the next one. Okay? And so if you need to do work done in the background, that is a simple solution. It's a very, very limited though. I actually have never had a use for them. Okay, but the intent service class works in this way. So this is how it works. And these are all things that you don't have to do. So essentially, what it does in the background without telling you is that it takes care of all this complexity. What do you do if you have a battler that needs to service intents that come in? Well, you need to do the following. You need to create a worker thread, because you want to do these uploads, say, in a different thread. You cannot do it in the same thread of the caller. So you need to create a default thread. You need to create your own thread, the execution thread. Then you need to create a queue of intents that are coming in. Okay? Whenever there is something in the queue, you execute it. And afterwards, after all start requests have been handled, you stop yourself. Okay? And then, okay, fine, it provides implementations to all these. But in practice, this is how it looks. So it looks complicated, okay, but it's not very complicated if you read the only lines. I should have used another color for the comments, I'm sorry. This is code I copied from, you know, the documentation. So essentially, the only thing you really do is that, oh, sorry, I cannot click here, is that you override on handle intent. This is the intent that your job dispatcher is giving you, right? So this intent is the description of what you have to do, okay? So you say, on handle intent, and here you do some work, okay? Here we just sleep for 5 seconds, not a very smart thing to do, but for example, we get a time, and while the system is smaller than this, we wait for more time, okay? So this is a very silly service. You give it an intent and it stays awake for 5 seconds and then finishes. But there you could be doing file uploads or things like that. I just want to give it to you as because I mean, it's officially one of the well-documented and common classes of services. I never had a particular use for them. I think a particular use would be, for example, if you want to upload things. But in the few cases where I really have to upload things, I usually needed more control than these on what to upload. Because, for example, this is able to upload only one thing at a time. In the cases where I really had to upload stuff, I had to upload stuff in a fairly efficient way. And the problem on a phone, this would be going into networking, but the problem on phones is that the latency can be high. So if you want to upload many small files, it's better to have more than one concurrent upload going on at any time. So anyway, this would take us to a completely different topic of conversation, which has nothing to do with this. So let me skip it. So an intent service is this. It's very simple to use. You can send it intents. It will execute the information in the intent, and it's simple to do. But it's not where I want to put most of my time. Where I want to put most of my time in this class is to tell you how to do very general services. So this is, you know, the lifestyle of a service. You can see it before the one of an activity that has on create, on start, on resume, and then on pause, on stop, on destroy. No? And here is the one for services that contains two sort of parallel tracks, because you can be created originally either by a start service or by a bind service. Okay, so if you're in any case, you do first on create, then you do on start command or on bind, and then the service is running or clients are bound to the service. Notice that once you are started, it's still possible for people to bind to you. It's just that the lifespan of the binding will not determine your lifespan. Okay? Instead, if you are created by on bind, if you are created in this way, the last time somebody unbinds, you may die. Okay? And then you do on destroy and the service is shut down. One annoying thing is that I tried for an incredibly long time, okay, and there does not appear to be any way of knowing how many people are bound to you, how many activities or other things are bound to you. There is really no way in which you can keep such count, because essentially you're not necessarily told after the first one when other people bind. I wasn't able to do it in a nice way, but fine. Now, this is a quite complicated slide. Let me see if there is another example. Now, this is a quite complicated slide, and it's actually crucial. And so we can spend a lot of time going back to it if we need it, but we have to essentially understand it. So the difficult thing to realize is this. When you start a service, you don't start a new thread at all. Okay? This is perfectly useless. Having a service that does not have its own thread does you no good, right? Because if the service is active on, I mean, you know, you can have something that is called a service. No, actually, it's not true that it's completely useless. Let me tell you why it would be useful to have a service with no thread, okay? Suppose I do a service that does not contain any thread. Let me tell you how that would work so that you know what it would do and what the limitations are. If you do a service that does not create its own thread, it still has a set of functions that I can call, okay? So I can at some point call a function and say to the function, and say to the service, you know, I call f. F runs and then returns. But while I call f, I'm waiting. So essentially, it does not do anything that is on its own if it does not create its own thread, right? By definition, I mean, you know, if you don't create another thread, there is nothing that can happen. So you may think, what's the good of that? I mean, it's totally useless if you want to do stuff in the background. But it is very useful if I want to give you a library. Suppose I want to give you a library that contains a set of very nice, say, neural networks, okay? And I have this library that is beautiful, and you know, it says essentially, you know, learn from this example, learn from this example. Now do the prediction for this other set of inputs. Learn from these. Give me the prediction, and you know. So I want to give essentially a neural net library that I distribute for Android, so that anybody can call it. Okay? How do I package these? I don't have a way to package. I mean, either I do a Java jar, which is a fine way of packaging your work for other people to use. But if I don't want to reveal to you my code, how do I do it? How can I give you some code without telling you what the code is? Okay, so that I can charge you. Maybe, you know, it costs $5 to download on your phone. Okay? What I do is that I need an app. The app simply says, you know, welcome, you have installed my wonderful library. But inside there is a service. People can bind to the service, and then they can call the functions of the service without knowing how they work and without needing the service to have its own thread. So essentially, services are a way to package functionality highly the code in such a way that other users can actually call you. Okay, this is a very important function. We will not use it in this way further in the class, but I will tell you how to use them because this is essentially a special case. In all cases, I will tell you how to call functions that talk to the service. The only thing is that in this case, you would need to just run the function directly. You wouldn't need to actually, have your own thread and communicate with the thread. So if anything, is actually easier than what we're gonna do. Okay. In what we're gonna do, which is the most typical use of a service, instead there are essentially three objects that we need to keep in mind in order to understand what's going on. There is the activity on the left, which is the UI that leads the service to do something. Then there is the service itself. The service is a class. It's not a thread. There is this distinction between what is a thread and what is a class. The service is a class that is able to run code, and you can bind it. We can bind to it on this software. Connection primitives with the rest of the software. Okay, and then we give you more details on how it works. But then there is the thread. You need to create a thread that actually runs and does stuff. Okay, and that is the thing that actually lasts for a long time. Okay, so that thread is what goes on in a long time. So we have these three things to coordinate. And the way it works is this. It's easier to follow in a sort of semi-chronological way. And this is a lot of examples. So, please ask me to go over as many times as you want, and then we will look at the code as many times as you want. But it works in this way. Suppose we started with a start service. We say, we really want this service, start service intent. This start service will hit the service and will trigger its on create. I simplified a little bit, okay? Maybe the slide is bad. But it triggers not only on create, but it also triggers on start service. But essentially, it triggers those two, okay? One after the other. So it doesn't matter so much exactly which one. At the level of this slide, it doesn't matter. Now, what does the service have to do? The service has to essentially start a thread, okay, that starts to run some code. Okay, so you do the following. You do a service task. And this is a bit wrong, actually. Allow me to correct it in real time. Well, it's not wrong, actually, but it's like okay, so this is a little bit better, I think. So this is a task. When you create a thread in Java, the thread is, you create a thread by first creating a class that implements runnable. The thing that implements runnable are these things that are method that is called run. The idea is that these are ways of packaging code that when you want to run it, you call the run method of the object, and this will start doing stuff. Okay? So if you want to create a thread, obviously you cannot simply create a thread without giving it code to execute. So what you do is you first create a runnable object, and then you have the thread running. Okay? And so the sequence of instructions you do is this. When you created the service, you want to give it its thread, and you say, my task is equal to new service task. So you instantiate an object of this class, and the object has a run method, okay? Because the class is subclass is runnable, okay? Then you say, my thread is equal to a new thread that will run my task. When you create a thread, you say you have to pass as an argument what you want to run in that thread, okay? So this creates the thread. The thread is created, but it's actually not started yet. And then as the third statement, you finally say, my thread start. My thread start will call the run method of your task, and then your background computation will actually start. Okay? So that's what you need to do in, I don't think I do it on create. I mean, I generally will see code, but generally on create, I say my task and my thread. I prepare the task and the thread in one create.
but I started in on-start command. Okay, there is some reason for that. The reason for that, I don't know when to say things. I need somebody who keeps a stack of things to remember. I don't know if the TA can be. Can you write? I need to explain exactly why it's better to have to define the threading on create, but start it on start. There is a reason that is precise reason. Okay. Now the problem is it done in this way? I'm sorry that it is so complicated. Maybe it's just that people need to think better how to do these things. But the problem is now this: you have a thread running, you have the activity that are created, and they cannot talk to each other. This is not a very smart situation. So what you want is to be able to pass information around. And in this case, because I wanted to do a sort of simple slide, you can also do the vice versa. But I want to be able to, for the service, to give stuff back to the activity. For example, the service can be listening to the, periodically checking the, I don't know, your altitude, and then every minute it tells you, congratulations, you climbed 20 more feet, or something like that. It's just a silly example, okay? But so the activity says, great, how do I talk to the intent? And the way to, so how do I talk to the service? And the way you talk to a service is that you bind to it. And I explain you why this incredibly cumbersome thing happens. But so you say, I bind service intent. So you send it an intent to bind to it. Then the service returns this thing here, okay? In this case, it's a very simplified thing. This is a super trick that I'm telling you, which is like a big shortcut, but it's not a general thing. But let me tell you what the shortcut is. You say public class my binder extends binder, because there is a general binder class and you have to extend it. My service gets service. So there is this method get service that returns what you are binding, okay? And you simply return yourself. Now, this is the idea is this. Why there is this notion of a binder? And the idea is that you want to isolate the code of the service from the code that other people see. So normally in Java, if you have a class and your class has some public methods, I can see all the public methods if I import the class, right? I really have access to how the class is made. In services, you don't want these, because services were built also to package code. So essentially, if you have a class that contains a lot of beautiful stuff inside, you don't want to return that as your interface. You want to return possibly a very different class that translates between what the caller does and what the internal representation really is. Okay? So for example, if I have my neural network class, maybe my neural network class is very deep inside, has a lot of fun public methods, etc. But maybe I want to return a binder in which the only things that I let you do is, give me one more, like, giving all the learning. Giving one training sample with the result, and doing the prediction on a training result which you don't say people the aptitude, right? So maybe these are the only operations you ever wanted to do. And so I can return to you a very limited version of the interface. I can essentially decide what to let you see. Okay. Now, in this case, because this would sort of be one more layer in the direction, and I think at some point you also have very to see. I mean, if you don't do these things, it's just complication that confuses you at some point. So I will be using in this class this trick that I am assuming that your service, rather than you wanting to hide your own code, you are fine. The service is a part of your same application essentially, and so you're not so much intent in hiding information that is in it. So what I'm doing here is here. If I say my service gets service and I return my service.this, I'm essentially returning in the binder myself. So for example, if in the service I have a method that is called public, I don't know, public learn, okay?
and this is defined in this way inside the service, you will be able to call it on the binder, because the binder is nothing else than the service itself. Okay, it's just a trick to short circuit at least one of the various complexities. Okay, fine. I binder the service. This binder returns the service itself, and when the binding happens, because this is all asynchronous communication, you have an onBind method here that gets called, in which what you do is this: you say my binder is equal my binder service binder, and then you say my service is binder.getService. And at this point you have my service, you have an instance my service here that corresponds to the service there. So when I say my service.foo, this calls foo here. Now, there is still one problem, that if I call foo to the service, I haven't called the foo to the thread that actually runs. Okay? And so what I need to do is that I need to say my task foo. And this calls this object. Okay? But if I call foo in this way, this is not running in the service thread. This is still running in the thread of the activity that called it, obviously. Okay? So I have to be careful that what runs in the task foo will be in another thread, and then to worry about lots than what happens in the service thread. But at least I can code it in the same address space. Okay? This is a bit complicated, right? So I don't know whether it's better to jump to the code for these or to look at the principle once more, but maybe you need to tell me. So creating is fine. You create the service. The service then creates a thread and starts. At this point here, the service that is created is just an object, and the thread that actually runs. Okay, so the first part of this diagram up to here is complicated, but I think it's still fine. This is a complicated thing, but let me try to explain it. We will see it in code in these simplified terms. I created this service and I can talk to it. I want to get the service back, because the problem of intents is that they don't give me anything back. I say bind service intent. No, sorry, I say start service intent, and this sets the service all right. But what do I get if I cannot get a reference to it? That's the problem. Okay, so I need to get a reference to the thing I started. And so, unfortunately, the silly way to get a reference to it is to go through this complicated story. So I needed to call bind service of the service. I create here an intent service that tells to which service I want to bind. Okay, this will trigger in the service a class, a public method that extends binder, that essentially, I have to essentially define what I will return as the act of binding. And I return essentially a class that has a method getService that will return myself. Once I get the binder, I call getService, and then I finally get the service. So that complicated code that you will essentially be able to cut and paste from what I do in large part solves this stupid problem. I started a service, now please give me a reference to it. No, I mean, it shouldn't be such a sort of astronomically complex thing to do. But you need to do it in this way. You need first to start it, then you need to express the wish to bind to it. You get a binder, you call getService on the binder, and that gives you what you want. Okay? And we will see it in code precisely. Okay? Should I switch to the code that does this, and then before I comment to the rest, so that you see it more concretely how it is done with some details missing in place? So this is the code. I will give you all this code, obviously, right? Is it big enough on the screen? Okay. So let me go. So first, let's look on the left a moment. These are the various players that we have. There is a main activity, okay? There is my service, which is the service. There is my service task that defines what I want to run. And there is a service result that we will see later, but is used to communicate between the two. Okay? And so it works in this way. Sorry, I don't know where I am. Let's look at the main activity. Okay, the imports, don't worry, they're done automatically, okay? So this is a bit of a trick. But in the main activity, this has nothing to do with the service example. I just tell you because you will see it. And so these flags essentially are used to create an activity that doesn't let the screen or the phone go to sleep. It's a dangerous thing to do, okay? But it can also be very useful. For example, if you're implementing a game and you want, to shake the phone while you play the game in order to do whatever, it would be really annoying if the phone went to sleep. So I don't know why, but I put in this code. I did it last year, the code. So I don't know why I did it, but this is what this is doing. But essentially, it's not doing anything related to our. Well, okay, there are a couple of things that are related. But the only thing that you may want to remember is this. It's useful to keep a variable that tells you whether you are or you are not bound to a service. This is, I think, a little bit of the drawback of Android programming. With being asynchronous, I say, hey, I want to bind to a service, and then I get a callback that tells me that I'm bound, etc. So, because it works with these callbacks ways, you don't have like a syntactic scope in which, when you are in this scope, you are bound. So it's useful to remember if you have a Boolean variable whether you are actually bound or not. Okay, but anyway, you may do it or not. But on resume, sorry, starts to happen the interesting stuff. So if you are in on resume, you want to start at the service. So what you do is this: you say intent is equal to new intent between this and my service.class. This is the same way in which you start another activity, right? It's just with a service. Then you say start service intent. Start service intent is something very simple, right? Because it goes to the service and it will start it. So it's a sort of the simple part of the above. And then you say bind my service. Bind my service is this code that says, I'm starting the service, I build an intent, look, this intent looks identical to this, but instead of calling start service on that intent, I call bind service, in which I pass these parameters. I pass the intent so that, the intent specifies to what I want to bind. Then you specify service connection. Service connection is, I will tell you later, is the callback. So when the service will be bound, you will be notified via this connection that the service has been bound. And I think we should look at that later. Now we should look at what the service does when you create it and when you bind to it. Okay? So essentially, the service connection that you see also there at the bottom, that will be called once the binding succeeds. But now I think we have other work to do, and we have to look at what the service looks like. Okay? Questions up to this point. Don't worry below this line. What we do is essentially this: start service intent, then we go to bind it. This could have been written in the same function, okay? I wrote it in this way just because I don't know. I mean, I like to split it, I guess, but I don't know why. Okay? And this bind my service, what it does is that it calls bind service with the intent telling it what to do after the service is bound, where to call back. Clear up to this point? No, really, if there are questions, ask them. Yes? Yes, I do it in the service, not here. This is the activity, and I don't make the thread in the activity. I make the thread in the service. Very good question. We come to it now. So let's look at it a moment at the service. The service is actually, well, okay, it's not super short, but it's not very complicated, okay? So it's my service that extends service. And then don't worry immediately about the notification IDs and etc. etc. You know, these parts I will explain a little bit later. But the important thing is this. You see, there is my service task. This is the task that is runnable. So I need to create a thread that will run that task, as he was asking, right? And so I create two private variables, the thread variable that will contain the thread and the task variable that will contain the task object to run, okay? And I do the following, and now you know, I know that you have to remind me of why I do it that way, okay? Then there are some other stuff, but we can read later about the binder. First of all, let's read about the basics of what happens when we create. In onCreate, oh, actually I started the thread in onCreate. Okay, fine. I could have done it in a slightly different way, but let's follow this. In onCreate, I do the following. I say my task is new my service task, in which I have to give it the application context. This is, you know, some way where, because I don't know why, we will see it later, but I wanted to give to the task some notion of what the context is, probably to read settings, I don't know, okay, it's not so important. You can define whatever initial parameters you want, it's your class, okay? Then I create a new thread to run my task, and then I start the thread. So why do I start the thread in onCreate? Why don't I start? Actually, now I remember the reason. There is a very important reason why you want to do it in onCreate and you don't want to do it in onStart, creating the thread. The reason is this: you don't have an ironclad guarantee that onStart service is called only once, right? If you typically in a service, I mean, one thing that you need to do is you need to control how many threads you have. Okay, because in the end you have to keep them. If you don't keep them, nobody else will. Okay, unless the process dies. Okay, so you don't want to have a new thread created whenever somebody tries to start you, because you may think, you know, come on, you know, my activity is the only thing that can start me, and I want it in such a way that it starts me only once. No, but you know, your activity can start you. Then you know, your activity may die, or you know, other things may happen. You may create the activity again. You may try to start it again, and now you have two threads. You have two threads that run the same task. By the way, how do you figure out if you're in such a mess and you have multiple threads that run the same task, etc., etc.? If you look at the log output in the phone, it tells you actually the process and the thread that is running. So if you see the same log message executed by two different thread IDs, then you know that you have two separate threads that are running the same code. Okay, so that's one of the ways in which you realize you are in big trouble. I think once upon a time I did a service that one of the services I did was like a heartbeat monitor, not for my heartbeat, you know, I had an application. And I wanted the application not to die. Heartbeat monitors is this technical term, you know, to check that some type of a system is running, stays up and running. So this service was essentially doing a countdown, and whenever we hit 0, it would check that the activity was still alive, and then it would reset the countdown. And you know, I was starting in the wrong way, and so at some point I had, you know, multiple countdowns active at the same time, and so you know, I realized it in that way basically. So, okay, fine. Okay, so I created a thread in onCreate. That guarantees that I only have one. And in onDestroy, no, actually, no, I'll cancel. Now, the other thing that happens is this, that the activity will try to bind to me. So I have a method onBind, and I need to pass back a reference to myself. So when they call onBind, I return my binder. We will see in a moment what it is. Okay? When they call onStart, I don't do anything very important, except for one small trick. So the logging is very important. If you don't log, you will soon lose the track of what's happening in your application, because you need to know whether these whether the service itself is starting. So you see, you receive start ID. What I haven't told you is that when you create the intent, no, sorry. So you're given a start ID when you create with these, which essentially distinguishes which start command you are receiving. It's not very important actually, so I don't know why I printed. Then I started a thread in case it's not alive. I think here I'm being a little bit paranoid because it should probably be alive already. Okay, I don't know exactly why I do this, but evidently at some point I must have run into trouble, and so I must have decided that this is a good idea. And the important line is this. There are various values that you can return in onStart command. The only one I've used and found useful is start CD. This means not only I've started it, but I don't want to stop until I will decide myself to stop. Okay. I don't remember even what are the other values. Maybe the TA could look up, but it's difficult to look up. But essentially, I have less permanent ways to get to start. Okay, but I don't know. I generally, if I create a services to do things in the background, and then I want to decide myself when I'm done with the various things, or else accept messages. Okay, so on start command, let me summarize it in this way. It doesn't do anything interesting in this case. Okay, the only thing it does is it returns this flag that says that it wants to stay alive until it decides to commit suicide. Okay. Instead, onBind returns my binder. And my binder is an important thing. Sorry, this is not, 1 second. I'm navigating in my code. So my binder is this thing that is declared at the beginning, okay? I have a private final iBinder. My binder is equal to new my binder. So I create once and for all one instance of this binder, okay? And I remember it forever. Whenever somebody will ask me for my binder, I give always the same thing back, okay? So that's how I wrote it, okay? And the same thing back is this. This is my binder. My binder is a class that extends binder that contains a single method. The method is called getService, and what it does is that it returns my service.this. It's a complicated thing apparently, but let me repeat that the intent is very simple. I've created a binder. Okay, I created a binder and there is only one of them. Whenever somebody asks to bind with me, I give them this binder back. This binder back is an object that has only one method. The only one method is called getService, and it returns myself, the service itself. Okay, that's all I do. I mean, to me, this is weird in this sense, by the way. I don't know if you share my same weirdness observation. What is weird to me is that my service.tis is a reference to the object. And yeah, no, I mean, I think it's fine. I mean, there is no doubt about this. Yeah. Yeah, so essentially when somebody asks you for the binder, this binder object essentially encapsulates the service itself, right? Because it gives you the reference to the method, to the service, so that then you can get it on the other side and you can call methods of it. It's as if you are saying, you know, give me the binder, and you know, I'm the service, I suppose. I mean, this is a bit of a silly example, but that is how I visualize it. You ask me for, I'm the service, you are the other activity. You ask me, give me the binder. What do? I get a big cardboard box, I crawl into it, and I ship myself back to you with a method that to you enables you to open the box. It's called getService. you know, and out pop I with all my methods ready for you to call me. This is, you know, in a crazy visualization what happens, you know. The service is auto-shipping itself back to the caller in this binder. Okay, fine, sorry, I didn't invent it, don't blame me, okay? But after this thing is done, the class will be over. No, I mean, it's true. We move to with the rest maybe next time. But I want to tell you what then happens in the binder. So if we go back to the main activity, okay, what do? I've asked to bind, and when I told it, please, when the binding succeeds, so when I get this cardboard box with inside of the service, call service connection. And let's look at what service connection does. This is not so complicated. But service connection is a class that has two methods, on service connected and on service disconnected. Okay, so you know this is the idea behind the callback. I say I want to bind, and I have to pass it a handler for the case in which the binding succeeds and fails. Okay, so if the binding fails, you know, I say, you know, nothing special. If the service is disconnected, I say that it's no longer bound. Fine, great. But otherwise, you see, I get an instance of service binder. And I also get a class name that I believe I don't use because I know what I've bound to. So I do this. I say my binder is equal to my binder service binder. Because, you know, I need to do a typecast because this iBinder is a generic class, but in particular, I got a my binder that I defined in the other thing. Okay, now I got my binder and I call get service, and now I get my service, and I'm all happy. Finally, my goal of doing this complicated startup is accomplished because now I have an activity variable called my service that actually contains a reference to the service. Okay. And once you do that, you're in good shape, because then you can say service bound is equal to true, you do a log, and we do something that we will explain next time, this other result callback, you know, we get into it next time. Because unfortunately, there is this small problem. Once I get a reference to the service, I can call the service, but the service cannot call me. Okay, that's quite annoying. And so we are only half through the handshake of being able to establish a two-way communication asynchronously between the service and the main activity. But I think we will stop here for this time. And the other half of the handshake, we will do it next time. Okay? But no, I don't want you to run away immediately. I want you to have a bit of time to ask questions. So is this clear or not? I'll give you all the code, and I think it looks more complicated. I mean, it is complicated. But at the end, you have to really think at this. There are two separate pieces. I started the service. Then I asked the service to be bound. The service gives me back a binder in which if I call get service, I finally can get the service. This is a quick summary. And all the rest is stuff around the idea. Clear? Okay, you know, really look at this code before next time. I'll put it up in a, you know, big bucket. You can browse it on the web or whatever. But look at this code up to this point carefully, and because it's, I mean, it's fairly tricky, and it's, I think, very valuable because if you follow these, you know, you have a pattern in which you can build your services, and it's a lot of work saved.
The service usually, were you saying if the service is kind of like while you're doing something else?
So say it again, what does the service usually contain?
Yeah, like, yeah.
Because you say, I think if you mind the hobbies, look, the thread is running like that. So that's what interesting stuff happens. What does the service do? And I think the answer is the service doesn't sometimes do a lot if you have a thread that most of the time. The service basically manages this kind of handshaking between the activity and the thread at the time. And so usually, when you do a serious work, you have the activity in order to the activity. Then you have the service that is not so large, it contains various handshakes and binders and stuff. And then you have my task that contains, you know, all the code that you say you want to do in the background that can be very sophisticated, composed of multiple classes, etc. I mean, one class is runnable, but you know, you can call other classes, and you do a bunch of stuff.
my service task is going to be handled with like
My service task is the runnable thing. I can show it to you, but I mean, I will not comment on what it contains, but I just show you one thing. It implements runnable and it has a method run. So that's where the computation happens. What's inside here, you know, we can talk about it next time, I guess. Okay? Yeah.
I'm gonna run this aside for us today.
Yes.
When you actually do have a private conversation with the user, once you go back to the main activity, I've noticed that if the user reposts immediately after, then their icon that says that you've already talked to them goes back to the default mode. The same message that you actually clicked on to go to the private chat does change. I don't know if that's like.
So I don't know exactly. Maybe you can tell me, if you tell me exactly the message, I can reply, because I need to pass exactly what to say and see how it is possible. But one of the slightly unfortunate things of how the app is built, how the backend is built, is that I put the messages in and the indices are built asynchronously, and there's more than one index that I need. And so it might be that it's entirely possible that some indices are built faster than others, and so some icons are built faster than others. So I don't know.
I just want to click on private chat with someone who I didn't think I talked to yet, and I reloaded in the private chat. Chat activity.
I mean, let me tell you another thing. When I do this search for whether you have a private conversation with people, I have a time horizon of half an hour. So it's possible that, you know, now we have the green bullet, the new refresh after the green bullet is no longer there. It's simply that such things can go out of scope. You can look at the server code. But anyway, if you can post me exactly what happens, then oh, and I forgot, I will give you a simple homework on WebView to do in the meantime, just to have fun with it. I will make sure it's actually not very complicated, okay? So I will post it, I think, later today or something like that. Okay. Okay.
My understanding of public versus private messages is if it's public, we post to the original server. If it's private, we post to that other server, the homework 3 server.
No, it's always to homework 3 server, actually.
Okay, because all the messages I've seen from myself and other people have been